Hello, and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, their history, and flavor profiles. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. All right, joining me today is a friend of mine, Graeme Cowlen. He's a home brewer. He actually uses the same exact brewing machine that I have, I believe, and among other things. And we're going to be talking about two beers today, so it's a special episode. We're going to be talking about standard German / Bavarian Weissbier, and then its North American bastardized cousin, the wheat beer. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So Graeme, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a home brewer. I've been brewing now for 5 or 6 years on a couple different setups and systems and whatnot, navigating my way through the whole beer world. Um, I grew up reasonably locally. I'm actually from Cambridge, Ontario, about an hour outside west of Toronto. My family upbringing, and it leads into really how I got significantly into beer and craft beer, hails from England, from southeast London, an area called Kent. So my dad, being directly from there, really got me started in beer, originally an imported beer outside of your standard North American macro stuff. So my, I guess, foray into pseudo type craft beer started really when I really started drinking beer. So probably around 18 years old. So quite some time ago. Never really viewed it as that back then, but it's been something that I was, significantly interested in from that time. Um, Currently, I live up north of Toronto in the King City area between Toronto and Barrie. Don't have a lot of craft brewers around me, so unfortunately, most of what I do is grabbing things that I have access to through the LCBO, which is good and bad, and I like and sometimes dislike. But like you, I'm sure I do enough of my ordering direct from breweries to make sure that my fridge stays, stocked full. And I'm interested in being here and chatting with you today, Rob. So thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. I'm always looking for fun and interesting people to have on the show, especially since we're just getting started. Excuse me. All right, so I guess let's just get right to it. We'll start with our first beer, which is a Bavarian Hefeweizen, or as we tend to call them, a Hefeweizen. This one is, and I always butcher the name. It's Wienstaffener, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's from Bavaria. It's an import, obviously, because we're here in Canada, and it's one of the oldest. Well, I mean, they say the world's oldest brewery. I don't know if that. I mean, it might be the world's oldest commercial brewery, but people have been brewing beer for a very, very long time. All right, so fun facts. I was doing a little bit of research on Weiss beers, and they're primarily European beer, obviously. Up until about the 1500s, though, nobody had actually really heard of them outside of Germany and the surrounding areas, because there was a royal family that actually decreed that no one else but them could brew this beer without a royal license. And a royal license means you have to pay fees. So they had a monopoly on the style of beer, which is actually kind of cool for the time, but kind of a dick move. So it had its moments, but it didn't really start taking off as a style outside of Germany until about the 1800s. And then in North America, it had barely gained any traction before World War One happened, and then it fell out of favor with North American crew. Um, so, but in the 80s, it really started making a comeback, and now it's a style that you can't swing a cat in a liquor store and not hit a bottle of it. So, I mean, obviously, its primary ingredient is wheat. It's a Weissbier, which literally translates into white beer. But it going back, if you look at the origin of the word, it actually goes back a little farther to and I can't remember the exact origin word, but it meant wheat. And since wheat gives the beer that kind of white, cloudy coloring, it became known as white beer. So, you got anything to add, Graham?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting beer. I'm glad we, walked the path. I go, everything about the brewery, you can, you know, as you kind of hinted at, somewhat dispute the fact that it's more of a marketing ploy because they found some obscure reference to the name or brewery of way back when and
Right.
whatnot. But it was interesting researching, as you said, the wheat beer's history, because there's some historians that will tell you that because of the predecessor, I guess the parent family of the grain that turned into modern day wheat, that this style of beer is likely the first style of beer that was brewed back by the Sumerians, I believe it was, thousands of years ago. So it's got an interesting history. Um, and I too, had read at why it was somewhat obscure or, ebbed and flowed through history where it was more prevalent and then almost forgotten about. And yeah, it was interesting because it does exactly have to do with what you said of needing to have a license, and only a certain family, you know, was able to brew the beer, and then they pass it on at some point to another single family, and it took forever for this beer to be able to be brewed outside of Bavarian region or origin of just those single kind of families. So yeah, it's interesting history, and you're right. You can't go anywhere now without finding one. One of the reasons why I think it's interesting we're brewing this today is I don't know if you disagree with this, but I find it one of the few beer styles where you can lean back on some of these breweries that are almost macro type breweries that are probably still to this day outshining a good majority, if not all, of the craft beer scene on what they're able to produce and put in a bottle. At least in my opinion, especially where we are, I think it's an underserved category here in Ontario. I don't see a lot of breweries doing German style, wheat beers, and when they do, I'm not necessarily sure they're staying true to style or they're doing a good job with it. So it's interesting we're going down this path and trying what one of the originals are today.
Yeah, yeah, and I have to be honest. I've never been a huge fan of the Hefeweizen style. I mean, it's fine, and I will drink them if they were presented to me. But I will not go out of my way to to move other beers in the fridge to get to a Hefe or any beer that's primarily wheat. Um, I like my beers. A little, I guess, more traditional, like malt, like barley malt and things like that. I like that heavier kind of kind of like me, fat boy kind of beer. That's not to say that this style is bad by any means. Like I said, if it is handed to me, I will drink it without complaint. Um, one of the things that I do like about them is a lot of the Weiss beers, especially if you're doing the standard Hefe, they use those specialty yeasts where you get that kind of banana-y aroma, and depending on what the processes they're using, sometimes you get a really heavy banana flavor in it. Sometimes it's just a really light thing in the background. And sometimes you get that kind of clove aroma and flavor in them as well, which can be really nice. I mean, if you're looking, I guess, for more of a it'd be more like a savory sensation. At least that's how I view it. It's a savory mouth sensation with the clove.
Yeah, you can. It's interesting, and looking at the yeast that they use and the difference between like a Belgian style wit, for instance, and a German beer is. And you're right. The yeast that they use for the German style, definitely a more on the fruity side, and that happens to be banana. I mean,
Yep.
you do get clove out of there as well. In my personal experience, and this may be wrong compared to a lot of other breweries out there, but temperature on fermentation temperature controls that significantly. The higher your temperature, the more fruity esters you get out there, the more banana you pull. The lower, the more clove type of spiciness you get out of it. But that's interesting when you talk to spiciness out of the yeast because it's vastly different than a Belgian wit, which can almost lean to saison farmhouse style of a peppery type of
Right.
you know yeasty spiciness that comes out of it, not as much fruit forward. And it's interesting what you talked about it not being your style and talking about the maltiness in beers. And what I didn't know until I started really brewing more was finding out that a wheat beer it's a malt forward beer. However, that maltiness isn't necessarily what we as consumers would view as maltiness because of the different character that the malt has compared to the traditional style of beers that we would consider malty. And as
Right.
you kind of pointed out and hit on, um, so I don't think people talking about a wheat beer, a German style wheat beer, will talk about the malt profile really at all, despite the fact that the hop, profile is extremely low and minimal on purpose, and that it's much more about the maltiness and allowing the I don't know what it's called, the phenols and et cetera that come out of the yeast
Right.
in the
Right.
beer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. The Bavarian or Hefeweizen style is particularly known for its low bitterness. The
Mm,
most of them are in the 10 to 15, maybe 20 IBUs. So you're talking beers that if I suppose if you were to brew it with a different style of yeast and it wasn't to have the flavor profile that it would be a really sweet beer. Um, because you wouldn't get that bitterness in it that a lot of beers have, especially like if you're trying to compare it to a traditional English bitter or an IPA. So it's gonna be way down the scale for in terms of bitterness. So
yeah, it's to me, it's always been a great summer style of beer. I just find it a little more on the refreshing side. It's definitely not for everybody. I mean, I know people out there that can't stand wheat beers. And there's lots of people out there that I think, at least when they initially got started, are afraid of how it looks in a glass because it's not a crystal Weizen.
right,
It's made to be that cloudy and has residual. A lot of them are can or bottle conditioned and has the residual yeast in there. And well, anybody knows that goes through this, especially in North America. We were conditioned on if that beer isn't clear, something's wrong with that beer. It wasn't made well,
right. That and then
you know?
that's a hard mindset to get people over.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's a tough one.
yeah, but I think with the advent of all the hazy IPAs and stuff like that, it's really helped people get over the fact that beer doesn't have to be crystal clear. No, sometimes you want your beer crystal clear depending on the style, but beer doesn't have to be. It'll taste just as good, if not better, if it's a bit cloudy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting you brought up the hazy IPAs and whatnot, because I think one of the reasons why I delve so deeply into these other styles like wheat beers and saisons, farmhouse, et cetera, is I like the profiles of them, and I don't tend to have to worry about it being heavily hopped with a hop that I don't necessarily enjoy. So I
Yeah,
have a higher chance of getting a an IPA or a hazy IPA that I just don't care for than I do if I open a bottle of a style like this or a Belgian wit or whatnot, because it's not about I guess I could say it's not about hiding potential flaws in the malt base and the build of the beer like you can do with an IPA, for instance.
Right.
So it's a little cleaner. It's got a more clean, flavor profile. So as long as you know that you like, you know, kind of banana, esters or a little bit of clove type peppery spiciness or whatnot, you can be reasonably comfortable that majority of the styles of this beer you're going to enjoy or at least find drinkable, versus that other style, which, as much as I love them, and I do, I've had ones that I don't really want to consume and I will never get again.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there's always going to be those beers that you try them and you're like, yeah, no, this is not for me. I won't be drinking this again. So, actually, on the previous episode, I was talking with Nick, the sour guy, and we were actually discussing the fact that I'm at a point in my life where if someone hands me a beer and I take a few sips of it and I don't like it, I will pour it out because you know people might see that as wasting a beer, but me drinking a beer that I don't like, I see as wasting a beer. So, all right, shall we
yeah,
drink some of this beer?
crack it open.
I had to open mine previously because I don't have a bottle opener right at my desk, so I had to stand up and walk over to the door where I have one mounted. But
I have a divot remover that has an opener on the other side, so that stays on my desk.
nice. Do a lot of desk golfing, do you?
I do a lot of, yeah, I guess you could say that. I'm a fidgeter. Um, I even have a fidget spinner at my desk here most of the time if my kids haven't stolen it, and
Uh-huh.
I will give that a go and a spin while I'm on calls and things. So
Uh,
there we have it.
I'm using my Highlander brewing glass, even though
Oh,
Highlander Brewing doesn't exist anymore. They're now what South River Brewing.
yeah, South River, and
Yeah,
then the original brewer from them, I forget. He's running another brewery.
yeah, and I think that's why I think that's what facilitated the name change. But so taking a nice whiff off of this, I mean, it's got that typical, um, it's got that typical like Belgian aroma to it.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I could have. It's funny the smells that I get to me. So it's funny, and I was saying this to another friend of mine. It's probably a little unusual, but because of the citrus aroma that I get out of this, and because of the fact that I grew up with my dad making me shandies
Mm-hmm.
when I was very young, that smells to me and brings back memories of drinking shandies,
Oh yeah,
which
I can definitely see that.
which is funny because as I was reading more about wheat beers, you find out that in the Bavarian region, especially, this is kind of an obscurity because that region became really well known for lagers, really clean, crisp lagers. And the fact that this survived over the years as being completely opposite to everything else that they really had in
Right.
that area, um, you can almost view it as somewhat unusual that
Yeah.
that region would be known for this that's so outside of what that region was, you know, really well known for with the lagers, the pilsners, and whatnot, and the clean and the crisp beers. But this does follow to their law, the old school
The
German
purity
law.
laws. Yep.
Yeah, the impurity law. That this has nothing in it other than, as you hinted on, it's mainly yeast, some pilsner malt, or sorry, mainly wheat malt, and it's got some pilsner malt, and it's basically water and yeast and a little
Yeah.
bit of hops outside of that.
Yeah. So according to the German purity laws, in order to be called a Weissbier, it has to be at least 53% wheat malt. So
Is it 53? That's interesting. So when I brew this beer and I use the that strain of yeast, for instance, I usually go about 60-40, about
yeah,
60% wheat and about 40%.
and that's fine. It just has to be at least 53%. It's kind of like bourbon.
Mm,
has to have a certain it has to be 51%
corn. Yeah.
corn
Yeah.
and things. So as long as you're hitting that threshold or above, you're good. All right, so this is it's nice. Um, it's got a medium body to it when you put it in your mouth.
Yeah, I
It,
agree.
it's it's this one's got the initial flavor for me at least is I don't get a whole lot until after I open my mouth. When I open my mouth, then I get like a fruity essence, and then as it dissipates and goes down my throat, I get that little bit of spice on the back end.
About the same for me. Yeah, absolutely. The nose is a little more, as I mentioned, on the fruity side. Um, Mouthfeel, as you said, it's medium. It's got a nice carbonation level.
Yep.
Probably why I think it's a great summer beer. Very pleasant, and yeah, there's no kind of clovey spiciness until it's on the way down on the back end very much. The
Yeah.
front is definitely, if you let it sit and warm in your mouth, you can get the kind of banana esters that come out of there, more on the fruit side. I personally like these style of beers because they're clean. And I think I probably started with this because I was so into traditional North American beers, very clean, I can say now, very bland lagers, um, that this is an easy transition, I find, for
It
that
is.
kind of change.
It
Even
is.
though the fact that this is more cloudy, it's still very clean and almost has a nice crisp flavor to it in comparison to a lot of the other things that are out there commercially in the market.
Right, and the flavor profile that it has isn't overwhelming. So this is an easy one for people who are trying to branch out from your typical, lagers and pilsners. It has a little bit, it's got that lager and pilsner backbone, I guess, frame, and then you get that little bit of fruity and spiciness flavor with it. So it's an easy maneuver to take some and go, okay, you like this beer, give this a taste and see what you think of this. I mean, it's a good intro beer for people who
Yep,
are looking to branch out.
absolutely. This is the beer that, if I'm exploring with friends of mine, types of beers that they could like or styles of beers that they could like, this is the one that I go down the wheat path. Um, it might open a door to more. They may end up, liking the spicier wits or go to a Hefeweizen or things like that. But this is a good, I say, very intro to. If you like the kind of yeast profile that you get, you like the malt profile that you get from this, then it opens the door to a slew of other opportunities out there to enjoy. But you can be reasonably, I guess, well assured if this doesn't suit them, that you probably just stay away from the wheat style down that path, I would
Yeah,
say. Because it's pretty basic, it's pretty clean, it's pretty clear, it's a good intro. And if it doesn't suit your style, then let's walk a different path.
it's a good gateway beer.
Yeah, yeah, it is a good gateway beer. It is a good gateway beer.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
on my second and third sips of this, as you drink more of it, you begin to pick up more of that banana flavor. You begin to pick up more of the spice on the back end, and I think like most beers, North Americans tend to serve them too cold.
yeah,
So then you don't get the full flavor profile. If you let it warm even just 2 or 3 minutes in your glass before you start pounding it down, you're going to get a lot better flavor out of it. And the same thing, like you had said, when it warms up in your mouth, you start pulling out those fruity flavors.
yeah. I think wheat beer is probably around. I do play with that a lot. Serving temperature, wheat beer is probably around 7, 8 degrees Celsius. I think it's around there. There's other styles that you drink all the time where you probably even want them as high as like 14 or 15 degrees Celsius. Um, there's some, and you might support this as well. I love barrel aged beers, even warmer than that. Um,
I tend to drink my barrel aged beers right about room temperature.
Same.
Maybe 2 or 3 degrees below room temperature, but yeah, Especially like the big barrel aged stouts and stuff. I love those at room temperature because then they really bloom and you get that flavor out of them.
I agree. I probably keep mine in a room that sits through the summer at about 67, 68 degrees. And I'll serve them right from there. If they're a little bit warmer, I will put them in the fridge for 3 or 4 minutes to take the edge off and pull
Yep,
them out and pour from that. So,
I do the
but
same thing.
I think you're right that, and it's funny. I don't think, well, obviously we haven't been marketed this way, but one of the ways to hide your beer not being very good and not being, you know, having literally any flavor, a la a Coors Light, is to serve them at like half a degree above freezing.
Yeah,
um, you will get nothing out of it other than a refreshing water-esque type of drink. No flaws, no this, no nothing. And for whatever reason in North America, because of the macro scene that we've been conditioned to for years, you're right. Everything virtually is taught to be sold at almost freezing level.
yeah.
And it's completely wrong for the most part in majority of beer styles that people drink outside of the macro lager scene.
Yep, I agree. You know, the only time my beers are ever close to freezing is when I'm cold crashing in a brew.
Yeah, yeah. I
other,
was gonna.
other than that, I serve, like I said, my stouts. I tend to serve warm. They're kept cold in the kegerator, but I'll pour it and I'll let it sit for 5 minutes or so just to bring the temperature up because you want to get the flavor out of it. Things like my blonde ale, I'll serve at around 7 or 8 degrees Celsius, and even as high as 12. I mean, because then you really start pulling the flavors out. They're still refreshing and they're still they've still got that crispness or whatever you're looking for, but you really start getting good flavor when it's a little bit warmer.
Yeah, it's a way that I've started evaluating certain beers. I'll buy a couple commercially available pilsners, for instance, and I'll let them warm up and give them all a try and see which ones hold their form and bring out more pleasant kind of flavors as they warm a little bit versus ones that you might find aren't done as well. They're not as crisp and clean in the malt profile, and you get a few things that maybe shouldn't be there. But then the other side of that is you kind of have to develop a palate for that kind of thing, I find as well. It takes time.
Agreed.
I probably did not, when I first started down this path, when I really started in craft beer was probably 2014, when I really started pushing down that path. And my palate is so different now, especially since brewing my own beer. It has changed my palate to the point I joke about this all the time. I can taste the hops in Coors Light,
Yeah,
which makes me laugh.
it's
I'm
it's it's funny how brewing beer really changes the way you view beer and the way you taste beer.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Like it makes me, the other beer example we have here. I mean, I know how traditionally you should be making a wit beer, Belgian style wheat beer. I'm not sure how many people are doing it that way, using unmalted wheat, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd love to get more developed palate on that side of being able to tell, but the problem is I need to compare examples that follow guidelines
Right.
perfectly, are great commercial examples of doing it the way it should be done, and in comparing it, which is the reason why in a lot of other areas I've been able to do that because they're way more accessible and you
Yep.
can just tell like if you want to talk about the hazy IPA style, you go to basically the first few breweries in eastern United States that started coining the term or had more commercial examples that people were trying to emulate, and you get your hands on those kind of things and you start picking apart the style when we're dealing with international styles that are probably done better elsewhere or more traditionally elsewhere. We can run into some challenges on where do you go to really evaluate who's doing
Right.
what over here.
Yeah. No. Agreed. I mean, it's especially for something like this style where if you want a true example of it, you're going to have to go to Germany, because even the stuff that we get here, yeah, it's from Germany, but there's that transport time, and the flavor profile changes during the time that it's sitting in the bottle, and it's sitting in a warehouse, and it's sitting on a truck.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. There's some great examples of other styles of beers that I know you love, which absolutely changes if you go over to Belgium and sit in the breweries and drink that beer, or drink the beer when it's just been bottled or kegged a week ago, and then get the freshest example you can get over here, completely different beer.
yeah, yeah, especially like if you're talking like the doubles and the triples and the things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
like I love to brew my own double, and I love that ruddy red brown color that it has, that super haziness, and that big punch of banana and clove on the nose. And if you buy commercial made doubles that come from Germany or come from Belgium, I mean, and you open them here, you don't get the same, because it's been in the bottle for so long by the time we get it. So
Yeah, it's it changes drastically. And some of the the bottle conditioned beers that we get, as the saying goes, that brewers make wort and yeast makes beer. They don't want you getting their hands on yeast and whatnot. So bottle conditioned, like a lot of those styles would be, that's a completely different yeast strain that is pitched. So what you're getting is, it's not different, because over there they would do that too, but you're getting a change beer, and the longer that it sits in there because of that, the
right.
more it changes. And we know through history of shipping beer, it just changed in the process of shipping. So I mean, you throw beer in casks and toss it on a boat and send it a couple thousand miles away, and it's a completely different beer than when it was cast initially. And it doesn't really matter what's been put in there; it just changes. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's gotten better. I think now, logistics where we are, and distribution and supply chain and whatnot, that we're probably getting much closer examples, true, than we did, go back 50, 100 years and whatnot.
Oh, most definitely.
But it's still not the same. And I love following the beer historians and the guys that do the traveling around the world, because they will be the ones that tell you, I'm sitting at such and such a brewery. This was just, kegged, bottled a week ago. I've had this 100 times in North America. Not the same,
Yep.
so it's
All right.
pretty interesting.
Shall we jump into the second beer?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So our second beer today is from Side Launch Brewing Company. It's just their wheat beer. It's the North American bastardized version of the German wheat beer. Um, fun fact: the very first commercial North American style wheat beer was brewed by Anchor Brewing Company, and it was released in
Hmm.
1984.
Wow. And Side Launch has updated their branding. It took me
Yes,
about 10 minutes to find this beer, because I was looking for the can that you have, and
right.
I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I know this location has this beer. Where is it?
Well, you know
And
what? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I had two other Side Launch beers in my basket, and I'm like, I was just with Side Launch. Where is this beer?
What's funny is I grabbed this. I grabbed two of these. They were the last two at the location I went to that had this label on them.
Interesting. So, as far as I know, this beer is the one that you'll get a lot of brewers in Ontario that will use as their beer to drink, or their beer to style their beer after. And what I know of this beer, and I'd love to find out more, is that this is styled after Belgian wit, that there is coriander and peel, citrus peel, put in this beer.
Hmm.
But I do not know further than that. I don't know if they're using a Belgian strain. We should be able to tell when we start drinking this, especially when you compare it to what we just drank,
Right.
which people should understand that drinking differing styles like that can almost cleanse your palate. Is one style put your palate in one direction, and if you go vastly different, you should have an easier time pulling out. So we should get, the spicy notes and almost the peppery notes that you should get if they're really using a Belgian,
Yeah.
wit yeast for this. But we absolutely should get a different, more citrus flavor than we did out of this one, getting more banana fruitiness and some coriander from there if they're really doing more of a Belgian, wit style. But you're right, it's hard to tell because for whatever reason in Canada, I think most brewers just brew a wheat beer, and I'm almost positive that they're styling it on the Belgian style of wheat beer, not the German.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed about this right away is it is a lot less hazy. You can almost see completely through it without any issue. Um, I mean, it's got a little bit of haze to it, but if I put my hand behind my glass, I can actually make out my fingers, individually. Whereas with the last one that we just tried, I could not do that. Could not see the definition where the lines were in my fingers.
Yeah, I'm pouring it now and I can see that. It's much um, paler, I would
Yes.
say. Um, I mean, I swirled the can to get a little bit more in it, but you can see the difference between the top and the bottom. It is definitely more clear and lighter
Yep.
through the thinner part of that glass. Completely different aroma.
Completely different. So this one's it's a lot lighter aroma to begin with, and
It
it's got almost like a citrusy. It like when you sniff it, it feels like it like cleanses your nasal passages.
it absolutely does. If if I didn't know if this was a blind, test side by side, I think the German style, my brain would go wheat beer, and this one not. I
Yeah,
wouldn't think that these styles would be related to each other based upon just the aroma that I'm getting.
yeah, yeah. It's you know it's different. It's not bad. That's the one thing I like to try and stress is you know beers are going to smell different. Different doesn't mean bad. Different just means different. So it has a different aroma than the previous one, but you can tell it's not a bad aroma. It's not like, oh, this is going to be terrible.
So I just had my first couple sips. It's interesting because I do, in the least in the past, I have enjoyed this beer on its own. However, drinking it back to back with that other beer, there's some significant differences with this beer that I'm not sure that I care for. It
Okay,
has a very, on the finish, after it's going down, it's got almost a very weedy taste to it, if
it
you know what I
does.
mean.
Yep.
And I don't know why it would have that significant difference one to the other because the malt base should be really similar. Um, I'm not getting a huge amount of Belgian yeast character. It is more on the spice side, I would
It is.
say, but I can't, at least right now, determine whether that comes more from the coriander they've used in it or if it comes from the yeast that they've produced this with. So if somebody asked me, I couldn't tell you that this wasn't using the same strain of yeast or a very similar strain as the German one. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's
it's definitely different. Um, I don't get the banana, the fruitiness like you got with the last one. There's a little bit of something there, but I can't put my finger on what that flavor is. And then you're right. As you finish it, it's got more. It leans more towards the spicy side than it does the
yeah,
fruity side. And
definitely does.
maybe that's just due to the process that they're using when they're brewing it. Maybe it's due to the how they're conditioning it when it's done fermenting. Excuse me, or while it's fermenting. I mean, now that's not to say it's a bad beer by any stretch of the means. I mean, if someone handed me this on a hot day and I was sitting on my back porch, I would definitely put it in a glass and drink it. I mean, I'm drinking it now. And if I don't like a beer, I won't drink it. I will take a couple sips of it and be like, nope, I am done.
I'm the same. This is a beer that if I've been at a bar and they really don't have much of a selection, I'll happily, buy this beer. I have in the past.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to me, the differences and why I thought it was a good idea to compare these two because you're right. This is probably the top of mind Ontario example for a wheat beer that we're trying right now. I think if you asked the majority of people to list a couple for you, this one would probably, for the most part, come up. And if people know where this style comes from through history, the first one we tried should absolutely come up as
Yes.
them mentioning. And now we're drinking back to back, side by side. And there's a significant difference, not even close to the same beer. Um, so it's interesting. Like, if Ontario indeed stays more towards the wit, why is that? Why the wit versus the German
Yeah.
style?
And I think it's more of a matter of a lot of people like that style, so that's what became the prevalent style. They brought it out, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, this is good," and they told someone, and that how things snowball. And that's probably, if I had to guess, that would be what I thought. This was the best. This is the best example of a non-macro beer. So here, try this. This is a really good beer. It's made by a small company. But it's gonna be adjacent in flavor to your Coors Lights and your Molsons and things like that. But it's going to be different enough that you're going to know it's not one of those. Um,
Yeah, I could see that.
you know,
Uh,
I don't know. I grew up in a household where I'm second generation born in North America. My grandparents on my father's side were from Germany, so when we had beer, we had German beer.
you got a lot to choose from there, and
Yeah,
there's like you had mentioned earlier, talking about other examples of beer, and one of my favorite breweries in the world is I forget the name of the brewery. G. Schneider Sons make the Schneider Weiss, and then all that Aventinus and Eisbach and whatnot. Absolutely love the brewery for the beers that they make. It would be interesting growing up drinking traditionally German styled beers because some of the breweries over there I absolutely adore what they make. And for various styles that they make.
yep.
You know, I love pilsners. I don't tend to drink a lot of pilsners here because, and I don't say it a lot, I just don't think they're very well done for the most part in a lot of breweries in Ontario. There's a few that do it very well. Um, and that for me has been the biggest reason why I think I still drink, German wheat beers from Germany and other styles from Germany because I don't think that we have a lot, unfortunately, of good examples of those types of beers being brewed here locally for us. Which, and you kind of hinted on it before, that may well have to do with the consumer.
Right.
You're going to brew what people drink, and we went through however many 100 years of drinking crystal clear, low flavor, really clean beer. So, I just I hope it doesn't happen. But if you look through history about styles being kind of ebb and flow, how we lose styles like Goza goes away for a while and then it comes back and whatnot, that we may end up hitting another point down the road where who knows, everything goes back to macro style lagers and pilsners and really clean, crisp beers and this whole walking down the path of hazy beers and wheat beers and saisons and doubles and triples and quads and whatnot just disappears for a time.
And it could very well be. I mean, you brought up gozes, and gozes, are a relative to this beer style. They are a wheat beer, just brewed a little differently with different water profile. Um, but yeah, they went away and they were out of favor for a long time, and it's unfortunate because the goza style is a fantastic summer beer. Um,
And I agree.
you
And
know,
it's funny you mentioned that it's kind of a cousin or whatever you want to say to this style of beer, because I think the entry point and how we got into sours and people over here doing mass amounts of kettle sours and whatnot were Berliner Weiss
yep,
was the
which
starter, which is
which
this
isn't,
essentially. It's a
yeah,
wheat beer.
it's a wheat beer. I mean, it's a Berliner Weiss, you know.
Yeah,
So
it's just a
yeah,
soured wheat beer.
yep,
Used a different whatever active souring bacteria, and that's it.
right,
It's just
right.
a lighter version of a wheat beer that's been soured, and it spawned this whole kettle sour craziness that goes on in North America now. Um, and I think this style, wheat beer style, is probably underserved. Maybe people don't like it, they don't buy it. But as you mentioned, it's opened the door to a bunch of other styles that we now have here and we consume.
Yeah,
And without this, we wouldn't have a chunk of the beers that we're drinking today.
that is correct. All right. So, if you had to give an example or two of really good beers in the style that we've been discussing today, what would they be?
So Schneiderweiss or Schneiderweiss from G. Schneider Sons, I think, does an outstanding job. They also touch on the other areas of this, going with Dunkelweiss, etc., and just darker beers and playing a little bit more with the malts that go in. But they do a fantastic job. The unfortunate side is all I can do is mention breweries from Germany. I don't really have any Canadian, Ontario based examples
Oh, that's
that I think
fine.
have
I mean,
done a great job. I mean, either one would be Erdinger.
yeah, Erdinger is a great example,
Yeah,
and Poliner,
yeah, yeah.
Poliner makes a great Weiss beer. Um, you know, yeah, I'm in the same boat, but mainly because uh, the Weiss beers aren't really my thing. Now, if we were talking Berliner Weiss or we were talking Goza, yeah, okay, I could name a few. But if we're just talking about Hefeweizen style, the Bavarian wheat style, and the North American variety of it, yeah, I don't have any good North American uh, ones that come to mind. But again, that's because I don't drink them that often. If I'm going to drink a Weiss, it's going to be a German one because I always know I can go pick up an Erdinger, or I can go pick up a Polaner, and it's gonna be the same beer every single time.
Yeah, exactly. My problem, I shouldn't say necessarily a problem, but the reason why I still go back to those is I think a lot of breweries here, at least when they're brewing, wheat beers, overspice them, and it takes away from the flavor of the beer. And you know, there's commercial examples of Belgian wits and German beers that are very clean. And I think the breweries now, at least in the craft beer scene, and it's probably pushed by the consumer, are afraid to make straightforward, clean tasting beers without flaws, and that they are more confident or comfortable doing different things that help to, potentially cover up some not ideal flavor profiles they're built, or they overspice them to get the thinking that people are looking for, a Belgian wit, for instance, because of the spicy profile that it creates, and not necessarily playing into the clean, refreshing, citrusy type of beer that they're looking for, as a summer type of beer. So I steer away from them because I don't think a lot of the examples here do a great job with that. And I'm, as you said, I can be. pretty comfortable if I'm going into getting a German example of these beers that I'm going to like it.
Yep.
And I can't do that with a lot of the beer that's brewed here in this
Yeah.
style,
And,
unfortunately.
yeah, and it might get better. I don't know. Again, this is not a primary style for me, so I don't keep up on it that often. Now, if we were talking about stouts and porters and ESBs, I'd be all over it.
Yeah, but so stouts and porters, I think there's a number of breweries here to do a great job with them.
Oh yeah,
Um,
literally there are tons of breweries that do
yeah,
fantastic jobs, especially I mean in Ontario alone, with not even counting all of North America. In Ontario alone, there are a ton of breweries that do really great job with stouts and porters.
yeah, I agree. And I think ESB is, or just bitters, is an underserved style here as well. I think there's some pretty good examples.
It is.
Another one. Um, but it's interesting because I think you're right. There's some great examples of those other beers, and I'd love on one of your shows, because this is a historical thing, is the actual difference between a porter and a stout, and what is it, what was it, what is it now, and who's right, if anybody, because there's a lot of conflicting information
There
between
is.
what's the difference between a porter and a stout. And,
Yeah.
you know, but we can do that because there's a lot of great examples, people that are doing, with historical significance beers to newer styles that people are trying and whatnot. Whereas when we're dealing in the Weiss side and the wheat beers, I don't think we really have that example to sit there and, figure out who's doing what and why, where the changes have come from over time and whatnot. We just don't really have a bunch of breweries diving into that. And that may well be because of the consumer and the type of beers that we like,
Yeah,
honestly.
it could very well be.
Because in a dark beer, I don't think people ever talk about a dark beer being cloudy or being clear and clean
It's well,
because
you can't see through a dark
you
beer,
can't
so
see it. So, I mean, like I know when I'm brewing beer at home, I don't fine my darker beers. Whereas some styles of lighter beers or, clearer beers, I do.
yeah,
And it's just because I don't have to on the dark ones.
that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean that's all a perceptual thing. So
Yeah. So it's funny that way. I find a lot of sides and beers is it's interesting, and I'd love to dig more into, or talk to people that are doing brewing great examples and have been, and finding out why they do or don't do certain aspects of things, and why things are traditional or they go away from traditional, and finding out more,
yeah.
about that. That's
Well,
that's a
I can say that we do have an episode coming up on stouts, and we do have an episode coming up on porters. So we will most definitely be diving into what's the difference, what makes one different from the other. Are they the same thing? Aren't they the same thing? Who knows? Um, but yeah, we'll be covering that in a couple upcoming episodes. I'm doing an episode on stouts with our buddy Danny,
nice.
and then I'm actually doing an episode on porters with Brittle Star. If you're familiar with who Brittle
Oh,
Star is,
beauty.
so
Yeah,
he's a fan of porters, and he agreed to be on the show to talk about his love of the beer. So yeah, those will be coming up. Can't remember what episode numbers they are, but yeah, they'll be coming up soon ish.
beautiful. Yeah, it's great. I love digging into different beer styles. I mean, that's one of the things I don't I haven't found a beer style I don't like. So
Yeah,
it's that's unlike, I think, most people. Um, it's great for me. I mean, I'll dig into every style, take a look at information that different people have on different styles and ignore historical significance, etc., and go down that path. And I think from the brewing at home perspective, it's beneficial. Absolutely
yeah. Well,
beneficial.
yeah, and I mean, the whole reason I'm doing this YouTube series is to try and help people who might not necessarily on their own try different styles of beers to bring it to make it more approachable. I mean, craft beer has done fantastic inroads to making beer styles more accessible and more consumer friendly. But there's still a lot of people out there that anything that's not a macro made beer is outside their comfort zone. And I'm kind of hoping that if we can get people to watch this and listen to what we're saying, it might get them curious enough or adventurous enough to venture outside that comfort zone and try a style of beer that they might not necessarily even consider as they're walking through their local liquor or beer store.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in North America, and I don't know if you've got plans for this, but talking about blonde ales, it's a gateway beer between macro and micro,
It
can definitely be used that way.
it is most certainly.
And one of the beer styles that we drink here was literally made based upon the drinking style of North American people drinking uh, macro beer, and that's the cream ale.
Yep. That
Um,
cream ale is a North American beer. I mean,
yeah, and it's based upon using things like adjuncts like corn and stuff that was all in macro brewing. And I'm like, dive into that, because that's another one that's a great, because there are people out there that have never had ales and view ales as I don't know, almost a dirty beer compared to lagers, because
right.
lagers are, not knowing that lagers are filtered like crazy, which is why the macro ones are super clear like that.
Yep.
And that it's a great transition between lager and an ale going on the cream ale side. Um, there's a few things that you can do, and it's really interesting. I think it's great what you're doing, because there's a lot of examples out there that can help
Yeah. Well, and that
open the world of craft.
and that's the whole point, is to hopefully help somebody decide that they want to try something different.
Yeah, really cool.
All right.
Really
Well,
cool.
we've come to the end of the episode. This is a supersized episode since we did two different beers. I'd like to thank my buddy Graeme for being on, and I'd like to thank anybody who's watching for joining us today. If you enjoyed the program, please click subscribe. If you want to know when new episodes come out, you can click that little bell. Feel free to leave any comments, questions, suggestions for beers or beer styles you'd like us to cover in the future, and we will definitely take it under advisement. I'm always looking for new things to talk about. So until next time, cheers. Thanks, Graeme.
Thanks, Rob. Cheers.